What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So I thought we'd go ahead and complete, or at least go further into my top 10 center listing. So at number 10, just do a brief recap. At number 10, I had Patrick Ewing, who played in the NBA from 1985 to 2002, mainly for the New York Knicks. At number 9, I had Artis Gilmore, who played professionally first with the ABA and then the NBA, of course, and he did play overseas as well. But he played in the ABA and the NBA from I believe 1971 to 1988, I believe. Of course, he won a championship in the ABA with the Kentucky Colonels back in 1975. At number 8, Big George Mikan, the first true superstar of the newly formed NBA in the late 1940s and the 1950s. Of course, won 5 NBA championships, including 3 in a row with the Minneapolis Lakers in the early 1950s. So at number 7, I have David Robinson, man. David Robinson had a Hall of Fame career. I got David as somewhere now, probably a top 25 all-time player. The first 10 years of his career, or no, not even the first 10 years. What would I say? I said the first 7 years of Robinson's career, he looked to be on the trajectory of a top 10 player. Um, he was in that threshold. The only knock on David Robinson, he was a tremendous player. He was a dominant big man. He was a great scorer. He was a tremendous rebounder, great shot blocker, tremendously athletic, strong but agile, quick. In a lot of ways, physically, he almost reminded you of a young Wilt, just a little bit smaller, but almost like a young Wilt as far as his build. Um, I mean, remember he had that he was real muscular, upper arms, just a freak of nature type athlete. But there was one knock on him, and everybody that remembers watching the NBA in the 1990s know this. The one knock on David Robinson was that he was a bit soft. Okay, he didn't, and he's a nice guy, and that's a good thing. Okay, it's a good thing. He's one of the great philanthropists in the NBA. There's an award that's been renamed after him for his goodwill and his donations and philanthropy and what he's done for the community, especially the city of San Antonio. I mean, he's a really good guy. That's a good thing. But sometimes some people felt like it was a slight detriment on the court. Um, he didn't have that nasty about him. Okay. Um, I think his personality reflected a little bit on his team. You think about his team. You had him. I think Sean Elliott, Terry Cummings was there for a while. Avery Johnson. What do these names mean? Well, all these men were really good players. They were also men of God. I think it's the nickname Terry Cummings the preacher, or preacher man. And that's not. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but um, there were some people that felt like he was soft. There was always this hostility between him and Shaq. Uh, Shaq, to me, he used to tell the story that David Robinson one time didn't sign his autograph, or his autograph request when he was younger. He took it personal, blah blah blah. Shaq has said now that that story wasn't true, but he just made something up in his mind to dislike or wanted to have a grudge against Dave Robinson. What I really think it is Shaq is a bully, and Dave Robinson's the type of dude that Shaq would beat up and take his lunch money. You know what I'm saying? Um, so he just naturally zoned in on a guy like Dave Robinson. Dave Robinson was a great big man, all right? And he Very few players have had as much of an impact on a franchise as David Robinson. I would even argue that his impact on the Spurs was even greater than Tim Duncan's impact on the Spurs. What I mean by that is, if I'm not mistaken, when he joined the team in 1989, after 2 years, he vowed to serve with the Naval Academy. If I'm not mistaken, he had a 35 game improvement from the year prior to the 89-90 season, and that's one of the greatest turnarounds. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's still tied for the greatest turnaround in the history of the NBA. So we look at Dave Robinson. He won two NBA championships, of course, in the abbreviated 1999 season. And for those who didn't want to give that season credit, they, of course, won the championship in his last season, the 2002-2003 season. I think I'll do this a little bit differently. I'm going to give his resume right now. He's a two-time NBA champion, like I just mentioned. He won the 1994-95 MVP award. He was a 10-time NBA All-Star, four-time All-NBA first team, two-time All-NBA second team, four-time All-NBA third team. He was the NBA Defensive Player of the Year in 1992, four-time NBA All-Defensive first team, four-time NBA All-Defensive second team. He won the NBA Sportsmanship Award in 2001. He was the scoring champion for the 93-94 season. He was the rebounding leader in 1990-91. Notice how, I'll say this after mention this. He led the NBA in blocks in 91-92. Now notice how Derrick Robinson and Akeem Olajuwon, I'll go ahead and name that now. They all were able to lead the NBA in both blocks and rebounding, although being smaller and not as strong as Shaq. So that's why I always say Shaq was not as dominant as they will lead you to believe. They were able to do it. Wilt was able to do it multiple times, almost every year he played. So he was the 1990 Rookie of the Year, NBA All-Rookie First Team. He's on the NBA's 50th anniversary All-Time Team. His number 50, of course, is retired by the San Antonio Spurs. He's the Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year from 2003, National College Player of the Year 87, Consensus First Team All-American 1987, Consensus Second Team All-American 1986, three-time CAA Player of the Year 85 through 87, twice NCAA Blocks Leader 86-87, NCAA Rebounding Leader 86, and the USA Basketball Male Athlete of the Year 1986. For his career, he scored 20,790 points for a 21.1 points per game average. He could have scored more than that, but he changed and altered his game for the betterment of the team and to let Tim Duncan be the lead dog. He grabbed over 10,000 rebounds and he blocked nearly 3,000 shots, 10.6 rebounds and 3 blocks per game. And of course, he won 2 Olympic gold medals in 1992, of course, in Barcelona, and also in 1996 in Atlanta. And he won the bronze in Seoul in 1988. So, Derrick Robinson was born in Key West, Florida. All right. His family moved frequently because of his father's activity in the U.S. Navy. And after his father retired from the Navy, the family settled in Woodbridge, Virginia. It was there that Robinson excelled in school and in most sports except basketball. Robinson attended Osborne Park High School in Manassas, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C., where Robinson's father was working as an engineer. Unlike a lot of gentle giants that played in the NBA who were always sort of tall for their age, Robinson was of average height for most of his childhood and teenage years. And his junior year of high school, when he was 16 years old, he was still only 5'9" in height. I'm sorry for the person screaming like a maniac in the background. It was during his senior year where he experienced a large growth spurt and grew to 6'6". He had not played organized basketball or attended any basketball camps, but the school's basketball coach added him to the team, and Robinson earned all area and all district honors but generated little interest among college basketball coaches. Robinson graduated from Osborne Park in 1983. He achieved a relatively high school score, of 1320 on the SAT and chose to attend the U.S. Naval Academy, where he would major in mathematics and play on the basketball team. At the time, the Naval Academy had a height restriction of 6'6" for all cadets, and in the autumn when the new academic year began, Robinson had grown to 6'7". Assuming that he was unlikely to grow much more, the Academy superintendent readily granted him a waiver. However, Robinson continued growing, and by the start of his second year at the Academy, he had nearly reached his adult height of 7 feet, which later prevented him from serving on any U.S. naval ships. Robinson is widely considered to be the best basketball in Naval Academy history. He chose the jersey number 50 after his idol, Ralph Sampson. He began college with no expectations of playing in the NBA, but in Robinson's final 2 years, he was a consensus All-American and won college basketball's two most prestigious player awards, the Naismith and Wooden Awards, as a Naval Academy first-classman. In 1986, Robinson led Navy, a number 7 seed, within a game of the Final Four before falling to Duke in the East Regional Final. Robinson played his first 3 years for the midshipmen under Paul Evans, and his senior season, under former University of Georgia interim head coach Pete Herman. Upon graduation, he was eligible for the 1987 NBA draft and was selected by the San Antonio Spurs with the first overall pick. However, the Spurs had to wait 2 years because he had to fulfill his active duty obligation with the Navy. Now, at the time that David Robinson joined the Spurs were on a downward spiral. This was after the George Gervin era, and they bottomed out in 1988-89 with a 21-61 record, the worst in franchise history at that time. While it was widely thought that the Spurs would become respectable again once Robinson arrived, no one expected what happened in his rookie year. Robinson led the Spurs to the greatest single-season turnaround in NBA history at that time, a 35-game improvement. The Spurs in 1989-90 leapt out to a 56-26 record. And over the next several years, David Robinson will become and emerge as one of the most dominant and versatile big men the game has ever seen. A routine stat line for David Robinson would be 25 points, 13 rebounds, 4 blocks, 3 assists, 2 steals. He usually shot a very good percentage. He usually shot around 50% from the floor. He usually shot around 70, maybe 4, 75% from the foul line. So he shot from the line pretty good for a big man. He could sometimes, especially earlier on in his career, he utilized his athleticism and speed and quickness. He was a terror in the fast break. But over time, David Robinson really did develop a really good game. He could score in the post. He could score face up. He, of course, could score traditional way with his back to the basket. But over time, he developed a very dependable mid-range jumper. And this ability to score, near the foul line, um, was critical in allowing Tim Duncan to emerge as a superstar. I'll get to that later on. Um, I would argue that David Robinson's best seasons were 93, 94, and 94, 95. And '93-'94, he would lead the NBA in scoring. It was a very close scoring battle between him and Shaquille O'Neal at the time, of the Orlando Magic at that time. At the time, it was the closest scoring race, I believe. I think it was 16 years at that time, since the '77-'78 season between George Gervin and David Thompson. That was the closest scoring race ever. Now, in the last game of the season, if I'm not mistaken, or at least the last game that Orlando played, Shaq dropped 53 points on, I think it was the Minnesota Timberwolves, and that temporarily gave Shaq the lead in the scoring race. I think Dave Robinson needed something around 58 points, or I can't remember exactly how many points he needed, but I think he needed to score at least 50 points or so. And the last game was April 24th, 1994, against the Clippers. I still remember that. It was a Sunday. And David Robinson destroyed them. Now, it was a team effort. David Robinson, I think, shot something like 26 or 43 from the floor. I remember him making, I think, a three-pointer in that game. He scored what was considered at time an unfathomable 71 points. And this led him to average 29.8 points per game and to win his first and only scoring championship. Now, the very next year, David Robinson would lead the Spurs to a 62-20 record. This is when he was teamed up with Dennis Rodman. They were supposed to form one of the most formidable front court defensive presences in the history of the NBA, but Dennis Rodman was actually not a really good fit for the organization. For that team, I think it was a lot of it was part of it was personality. It was a culture shock. He didn't really get along with his teammates. He was unhappy there. Um, and then Robinson won the league MVP that year, and that pissed off a particular person. I'm just going to say that Akeem Olajuwon was not pleased at David Robinson taking an award. Now, Robert Ory tells a story about that was one of the few times he actually saw Akeem Olajuwon legitimately angry. And that anger fueled one of the most unbelievable, one-sided beatdowns when it comes to matchups. Olajuwon destroyed David Robinson in that Western Conference, I believe it was Western Conference Finals. He destroyed him. I think they beat the Spurs 4-2 in that series, but I mean, it was just child's. I do want to say this though. Despite that series, people do get this misconception that Olajuwon dominated David Robinson generally, which actually is not the case. In actuality, at least when it comes to wins, the Spurs beat Houston more than Houston beat the Spurs. But that particular run, Olajuwon was unstoppable, and there was nothing Dave Robinson can do about it. The next year, Dave Robinson still had a typical dominant season, but the headlines were changing. Attention was being focused more on the East as Michael Jordan, who had came back toward the tail end of the '95 season. The Bulls were doing their thing. David Robinson was still a great player, but you know, I think it was becoming apparent that the Spurs were not a championship team. And then in '96, '97, I think it was early in that year, that's when Robinson suffered that devastating injury that derailed him for most of that season. And the Spurs I think they only won 20 or 21 games that year. And that's how they were able to acquire Tim Duncan. Now, Tim Duncan is a player who, look, you gotta remember at this time, Tim Duncan was 22? David Robinson was now 32, I believe, at the time. So obviously, your future is in this guy. Robinson is not the same player anymore after the injury. So what happened is David Robinson, being the great teammate that he is, and this is one of the assets of him being a nice guy, not an egotistical maniac, or asshole, is he pretty much stayed out of the post and became more of a, mid-range guy. Well, not mid-range, but he basically played more in the high post and let Tim Duncan do what he did in the low post and be the dominant first option that he was. And the others got involved and did what they were supposed to do. Avery Johnson had a great uh, 98 and 99 campaign. And in that 50-game season, they were able to win their first ever championship. Now, later on in 2003, in Dave Robinson's last year, by that time, Tim Duncan had firmly established himself as the best player on that team, and quickly becoming, probably the best player in that franchise history. Though Dave Robinson is probably, most people's eyes, second, or I would say second, and then George Gervin probably third. Um, but in Dave Robinson's final season, he went out with a championship. Whereas the 2003 NBA Finals, they played against the heavily mismatched New Jersey Nets. And even though the Nets put up a good fight, winning 2 of those games, they lost in 6, 4-2. And Dave Robinson went out, rolled out into the sunset as a 2-time NBA champion. Now, during his career, Dave Robinson averaged 21.1 points per game, almost 11 rebounds per game, 3 blocks per game, and 2.5 assists per game over 987 games in his career. Also, he is one of only a very small group of players to have scored over 20,000 career points in the NBA, as well as being one of only 4 players to have recorded an official quadruple double. Now, of the official ones, it's Derrick Robinson, Nate Thurman, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Alvin Robertson. Though, I always have to point this out, it's very, very likely that Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, as well as Nate Thurman, may have done it more, but more times than just once. But Wilt Chamberlain uh, and Bill Russell most likely have had more than just one quadruple double. Think about it. I mean, it's common sense. If Wilt Chamberlain was having seasons averaging 20 points, 20 rebounds, and somewhere around 7 to 8 assists on average, and it was estimated or guesstimated by what's his name, the statistician with the Sixers at the time, uh, Poland, I think that's his name. If it's guesstimated that he's averaging 9 blocks per game, then you could just pretty much come to the conclusion that he probably had several quadruple doubles. And that's why I say that Wilt Chamberlain is probably the all-time leader in triple doubles as well. You know what I'm saying? Um, but David Robinson, still one of the all-time great players. Nice guy. Unfortunately, he's lost all of his fucking hair. But I don't think he cares about that. So at number 7, I have David Robinson. Man, tell me what you guys think.